Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. No prayers, no buffalo speeches, and no spirituality shows. While this podcast does not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do take a tough look at history, oppression, and our survival. We highlight the voices of Native activists, writers, poets, artists, thinkers, and musicians who are fighting for the rights of Indigenous people all over Turtle Island. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. In this moment of historical change and social justice, our voices matter now more than ever before. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
Sego, and welcome to Let's Talk Native. And it is Let's Talk Native, but we're going to talk about some other stuff. But before I get into it, let me just say, we are on Patreon, and I want to encourage people to check us out and become a member, sign up. You can go to www.patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. You can sign up as a member and support what we're doing here on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. Again, this is Let's Talk Native, but I'm going to talk about some stuff that may not, on the face of it, seem that native. I'm going to talk about Donald Trump. And here's what I got to say right out of the gate. He's not an accident. He's not an aberration. Donald Trump is the president of the United States almost by design. For anybody who says the system failed and that's what yielded or produced a Donald Trump, no, the system worked exactly the way it's designed, and it's designed poorly. So I want to go through this because I think it's important that people realize that he's not an accident and that he is actually a pretty good representation of what the United States is and always has been. And I know some people are going to say, no, we don't deserve him. We deserve something much better. Well, as a Native person, I'm going to remind you of some of your history. And perhaps you're going to realize that you got exactly what you deserve in Donald Trump. What you do on November 3rd is, we'll see how that plays out. But what you have now is your own creation. I know many of you don't want to claim him as your president. And many of you do, but the reality is, you produced this guy. You created this guy because you created so many like him in the past. So let's go through it a little bit and just stop with this whole America deserves better stuff, because you probably don't. I'm going to start by talking about your system. Before I even get into what is the American culture and how that has produced a Donald Trump, I want to talk about your system. Look, he was elected by the Electoral College, not by the popular vote. The Electoral College is a slave-era concoction that was basically to shift and give more power to the slave states of the South. And you're not going to change it. It's been in place. We're going we're well into the 3rd century of the United States. It requires 2/3 of the Senate to change it. And frankly, whoever is in power never really wants to shift how the system of power will be maintained. So the Democrats won't change it if they have the Senate. They'll never have 2/3 of the Senate anyway. But the whole system of selecting a president is still based on some racist dogma associated with slavery. And I'm not going to get into the culture of slavery and some of the other things that are Native specific. I'm just talking about your system. But your system for selecting a president is born out of a slave era concoction to shift a benefit and to give more control to the slave holding states of the South. And those states still are the right wing conservative Republican strongholds. Yeah, the parties shift a little bit of their platform over the centuries, but it is predominantly shifted with this Electoral College vote to give a benefit to Republicans. And it doesn't stop there. The Senate is clearly a disproportionate shift of power towards rural states. The southern states, even the plain states, Dakota, the Dakotas, they have as many senators as New York or California. So these rural states that are, again, Republican strongholds, have as much power or as a state with 4, 5, 6 times the population. So the Senate is not a democratic system. And it's not even to even suggest that it's a democratic representative democracy. The way it shifts disproportionately the amount of power to rural areas. It again, all those states swing towards the Republicans, and it's not divided along population lines. I mean, not only did Trump not win the election with a popular vote, but when you look at how the seats of power are with the Senate, and frankly, it used to be the same way with the House of Representatives as well. You have to remember the House. For those of you who don't remember what the 3/5 compromise was, this was a way to make sure that the slaveholding states could get warm body credits for their slaves, so they could get a disproportionate amount of representation in Congress. So that's again another shift that benefits the conservative, what is now the conservative, but it's all born out of slave era devices to make sure that the real population centers would not have as much control as the rural areas, in spite of the fact that the United States today will claim to be this representative democracy. It's not equally representative. It is really skewed, and the Republicans have a huge advantage. So when you wonder how something like this happens, it's the system. And nothing I'm telling you right now, nothing I'm saying here is new. This has all been in place, since the beginning. A few tweaks here and there. Yeah, they did away with the whole 3/5 thing. And remember, the 3/5 compromise was so that 3 of every 5 slaves could be counted for congressional representation. They still weren't considered citizens. They weren't ever going to be. They couldn't vote, but they would be counted simply to apportion more representation to the slaveholding states. So this is the way the system is built. It's not a great system. It's a system that is flawed, and it has always been flawed. So again, I'm always going to go back to the same thing. Trump or another Trump is not an accident. It's built in, it's baked into the system. It's not a failure of the system. The system was always skewed to benefit a certain ideology, and that ideology ends up getting a disproportionate amount of power. So there's that. Again, you can't even escape the fact that slavery played such a huge part in shaping how the power would be distributed within the United States. It always did, and frankly, when people suggest that slavery is something in the past and that it has little relevance on today, and that's usually a right-wing ideology, that's not true. Everybody in the United States is still living with this stuff, and again, it isn't going to change. There's no effort to change how many senators represent a state. There's no desire to change that so that it is affected more by the population centers. In fact, any effort to change that is strongly rejected. Now, the other thing that has been a major issue when it comes to representation has been the gerrymandering that takes place, and the Republicans have had a much stronger hand at that. Not that the Democrats are innocent in this mix, but see, this is all part of the system that not only was designed to be flawed in the beginning, but would continue to stay flawed. So these are the kinds of things that when you understand that this is the system as it was built, that it isn't the democracy that the United States has touted throughout the world. It is a very, very flawed system, and one that has always favored a certain American-style aristocracy. It's utilized where wealth could be accumulated off of labor to make sure that wealth would have a steady stream of power, regardless of where the population center shifted to. So that's the political system. Now, let me talk a little bit about the culture, because when people say, well, that Trump is such it's such a travesty that Trump is the president. Let's be clear here. Trump was very, very popular. You, the American public, made him into a celebrity. Not only did he represent aristocracy in terms of wealth and the accumulation of wealth, the inheritance of wealth, and the accumulation of wealth, but you made him a household name by making his television show as a reality TV star, one of the biggest shows in the country. So you bolstered that ego. You created the ego. Him getting elected didn't create the ego. You guys helped create that. And this is part of the culture that has become so much a part of the United States. It's the Duck Dynasty culture. This idea that this right-wing conservatism can play out on television and draw such a large crowd. Fox News, for instance. This is a system that you all have a hand in. Now, look, I know there's always going to be those that say, no, I have nothing to do with that. I don't watch those shows. Well, Donald Trump made his success in New York City, not exactly the rural South, right? I mean, he made his name and his fame and his fortune in New York City, a place where you would think somebody like this would meet up against the so-called progressive left. Not so much. He bought politicians, and the politicians were for sale. Why? Because that's the system that existed. But you all embraced him. You embraced him as he was, crying out for the death sentence to the Central Park Five. There wasn't a condemnation. Now you can look back and say that there should be condemnation, but at the time, this is the kind of thing that fed him, fed his ego, fed his ideology. This is all the stuff that has been built up over time that creates a Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not an aberration. He is your creation. He's not an accident. And when you say you don't deserve Donald Trump, well, again, let's get a little bit more into the history of the United States. Slavery, genocide, murder for hire. Yeah, and by that I'm talking about the bounties that were paid for taking native scalps. And I'm not talking about under King George. This was being done in the 1800s in California. This is the country that you say doesn't deserve a Donald Trump. A country that was built on not only on slavery and genocide, but also racism, Jim Crow, white supremacy. You can find quotes from every president, from George Washington up through Theodore Roosevelt, promoting this concept of white supremacy. White supremacy didn't disappear in the modern era. It went underground a little bit. Trump just brings some of it back. He can be more blatant about it. And you can't deny that white supremacy is a thing. You see people in the streets carrying guns every single day. Every single day that somebody says, no, we need justice reform. There's an element of in the United States that boos in a football stadium when football players join arms saying we want to take a moment of peace, a moment of silence for justice reform, for social justice. That gets booed. And this is one of America's greatest pastimes, watching football. The football team in Western New York and Buffalo, they've got Black Lives Matter across the back of their helmets. The social media lit up like crazy with all the people condemning that. Just the idea of putting something like Black Lives Matter invokes all of this response. So tell me this country doesn't deserve somebody like Trump? Now, you can say that that's a lunatic fringe, but again, half the Senate supports is in Trump's corner. Most of the Supreme Court is in his corner. All of the police unions, including in New York City and Buffalo, all the major cities, all the police unions, even in the so-called liberal states, all endorse Donald Trump. So he is not just representing the lunatic fringe. He has broad-based support in many sectors of the United States, of U.S. society, of U.S. industry, and certainly in the Justice Department and in the police departments. So when I hear people again go over and over again saying the same thing, that yes, the United States deserves better, and if you think that Trump is so far to the right, if your answer to that was Joe Biden, if you think Joe Biden's going to somehow swing that pendulum in a big way to the left, no, he's gonna stop right at status quo. He might try to pull back a little bit on what Trump did, but he's not going to push it to the left. He's pushing it to the center. And yet, and after Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, she won't push it to the left either. See, these are the things that are built and baked into the system that is the United States. And again, going through some more of that history and the politics. Look at the combination and the connection between religion and politics. I'm not just talking about evangelical right. I'm talking about like some of these social issues. There was all this talk about whether abortion should be a litmus test for a Supreme Court justice. Well, it clearly is, but it's also a litmus test for who can run as a Republican nominee. And oftentimes, it becomes a litmus test for the left as well. So something like that, most of people in the United States will never get an abortion. They will never be even connected to an abortion. But these are the kinds of issues that take on religious tones and overtones. They take on a bigger, more influence than the things that affect all of us, healthcare in general. And in fact, the abortion issue can even affect healthcare because it'll affect women's health. Not just because of abortion, but because of how they connect it to other things that are associated with care for women. So there's all of these things that you can't help but notice how much they become intertwined because that's the way the system works. The whole pay-to-play system. This is a system that produces corruption. And look, you've been here before. Ronald Reagan was a celebrity you guys elected, and I know the right wants to treat him like a god, but he frankly wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer either. Nor were some of his successors. Oh yeah, George Bush Sr. He was a CIA guy, smart guy, sure, but as evil as the day is long. And his son W. He may have been. I mean, I realize it's kind of neck and neck who was the dumbest president, George W. Bush, or Donald Trump. Donald Trump oftentimes gets painted as some sort of media genius because he seems to stumble into some level of media success. Look, and there we go with the media. The media, which is supposed to be like this, this fourth rail of government, so to speak, it failed miserably. Not only misrepresenting the last election cycle, but giving all of the free press that they gave to Donald Trump, making him even more of a household name than his hit TV show had. This is all part of the system, and you eat all of this stuff up. And again, back to the religion thing, the evangelical right, the Catholic Church, all of these religious institutions that sway not just people on the far right, although more so there. It weighs into the Hispanic community. It weighs into the Black community because we have let religion and politics creep into so much of what produces and yields to the next politician that it has a disproportionate influence. And it can ignore things like his comments about grabbing female genitalia. It can ignore things like porn stars. It can ignore all that stuff because they can hang on something like appointing judges that will oppose abortion, skewing some of the revenue sources, tax cuts to the rich. Those are the kinds of things that you can get a lot of support on the right wing from that, and it ties directly in to judges and to churches. So this whole thing ends up getting manipulated in ways that are almost inconceivable if you were to look back. And as a Native person who can look at this a little bit from the outside, look, I don't vote in your elections. I won't vote in your elections. I don't consider myself a U.S. citizen. I am Gonyaga. I'm Mohawk. So for me, a lot of this stuff is an exercise and that allows me to be a spectator to what's going on. Yes, I'm affected by all this stuff, negatively affected. But I was negatively affected by the last Democrat in office too, Barack Obama, who pushed through the Dakota Access Pipeline and who deported more brown people than any other president in the history of the United States. So, yeah, I am affected, and I see the effects of your politics, but I also can observe it in a way that perhaps most Americans can't, and that's why they can look at this stuff and say, "Oh, this is a failure. This is a breakdown." Well, it's what your system produces. It is the way the system is designed, and perhaps my observation of this thing, and I look at the history of the United States, I view this sentiment that somehow the United States deserves better, and I'm thinking, the way I see the United States and U.S. history and the develop of what is American culture, I think Trump fits right in. I don't think he is anything but a manifestation of all things American. The politics, what the United States has done in the quote unquote name of democracy, becoming the world's superpower, and spending billions and trillions of dollars, I should say, on being the world's aggressor. And you think that's unusual that a country like that would produce and elevate a Donald Trump? Trump is the president you deserve. Is it the one you need? Oh, no, probably not. And if you ever want to change, you've got to do more than hang your hat on a president signing the Emancipation Proclamation into law. You've actually got to make change. What's wrong with the United States has always been wrong with the United States. Donald Trump didn't create the problems that exist today. He may be exploiting them a little bit more. He may be not as prone to hide the blemishes or cover up the flaws in the system. He doesn't. He doesn't care. He's arrogant. So he has no problem saying what far too many Americans already feel. And I'm not just talking about white supremacists. He's been fully embraced by the very people who are supposed to serve and protect you. Again, talking about the policemen's union. I mean, these police departments are all in with Trump, and these are the folks that you're supposed to count on to serve and protect you. This is where it gets problematic. So when I hear anybody say the United States didn't deserve Donald Trump, I beg to differ. I think it plays out over and over and over again how much the U.S. history and you can't. You've got to push away the propaganda that makes the United States seem like they've done everything right, because they haven't. And I've talked in previous shows about the original sins of the United States. And it's easy for the United States to suggest, yes, we were wrong with slavery, but we fixed that. Well, there's a whole lot of things that never got fixed. And there's a whole lot of things that were wrong from the beginning and are wrong today. I maintain that the genocide is a continuing process in the United States as far as Native people are concerned. Now, how is that? How could that possibly be? Well, I'll tell you. Because genocide isn't just killing us. It isn't just sterilization. It isn't just taking our children. It's all of those things. But it's also the conditions that are created that will cause people to cease to exist. So assimilation, the idea of trying to take away our identity and forcing us into U.S. citizenship, that's still genocide. In fact, denationalization was considered a war crime in the early 1900s. 1913, it was already being discussed as a war crime. And since then, there has been even more efforts to assimilate Native peoples by stripping away our culture. The residential schools, yeah, there's another example of a sin, if you want to call it that the United States entered into, funded, and had broad-based support across the United States. So when you say, well, how does the United States get to a place to elect a Donald Trump? The United States didn't elect Donald Trump. You did. You did it with your electoral college. You did it with your vote. You did it with your big dollar campaigns and so much of the pay to play system that exists in the United States. And I'll say it again. There's no real appetite to change any of that. Oh yeah, and an occasional politician will step up and say, "Well, we got to make sure that we have public finance for campaigns and that stuff, and we've got to change this and we got to change that." But those end up being the real left wing and too progressive concepts to really embrace into a platform. You're not going to hear. I mean, to the extent that the Biden-Harris campaign have taken in any of the more progressive ideas, they're window dressing. And it's not they're not going to do any major justice reform. They're not calling for any major police reform. They back completely away from things like reforming police departments and changing, how law is enforced within the United States. They've backed away from that because they don't want to give anything up to Donald Trump. So as I look at the system and I see even how it flows back and forth from right to left, more to the right than certainly to the left, all it is evidenced over and over and over again is that your system will produce a Donald Trump. And then what's the answer to a Donald Trump? Not somebody farther to the left. Somebody barely to the left. Somebody too centrist like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So there isn't the kind of shift, and there isn't the kind of pendulum swing where you're going to see, some movement to the right and then an equal or greater movement to the left. No, it never happens that way. Barack Obama wasn't that great swing to the left. Yeah, he was the first black man to sit in the White House, but he didn't necessarily solve issues for racial justice. In fact, in many ways, you could say he was king of the drone strike. Those weren't white people he was striking with drones. He was, the highest deportation rate. Deportation rate. Those weren't white folks. He wasn't deporting people back to Norway. So these are the kinds of things that you have to see where the system is. And until Americans want to change the system, you're going to end up with more Donald Trumps. Look, you went from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, then to Donald Trump. And maybe you'll go to Joe Biden. But none of these things are the kinds of movements that really advance and push the United States into the preeminence that it claims to be. It'll be the United States has lost much of its credibility. And it started losing it during the Reagan years, but it's been losing it more and more and more. And even look, Barack Obama gets elected, and 2 years later, there's a wholesale sweep across in the midterm elections that got his power and his authority. And so he basically spent 2 years as a lame duck especially in his last term. Couldn't even nominate a Supreme Court justice. So this is the system that you have essentially created, and or was created so long ago that you never changed. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you vote for a few more Democrats or or you try to pull the Republicans a little bit farther to the center. The system isn't changing, and the wholesale shift that needs to occur that will really empower people and will really be able to say, will enable the United States to call itself a democracy. I don't know how they can even call themselves that. And I'm not saying democracies are flawless. There's something really wrong with 50 plus 1 having control over 50 minus 1. That's democracy. But you don't even have that, nowhere near that. In fact, you elect presidents who don't even reach a 50% turnout on elections. And you don't have much of a turnout when it comes to those elections in the first place. By the time you back all the way out to the primaries, you're going to find out the people who got placed on the ballot with maybe 30% of the electorate. And it's hard to suggest that is democratic rule. So your system is so flawed that it is bound to create some of the very things that you are witnessing today in Donald Trump. Look, it has gotten to the point where there are many people in the United States who feel like even if Donald Trump loses, it is going to be a contested election. It's going to go on for months. And, I've had to remind people over and over again, the election takes place in November. The transfer of power doesn't happen until January. There's a whole lot that can happen between November and January. And the President of the United States has control of the military. The President of the United States has control of the Justice Department. This president has control of the Supreme Court. Yes, he does. The Supreme Court certainly leans far to the right. He's appointed more judges in the United States than previous presidents, and that includes a couple on the Supreme Court. He has the Senate on his side, even at very least until January. So there's a lot of control that Donald Trump has. Over 50% of the governors in the United States are Republicans. He also, as I said, almost every major police union has endorsed Donald Trump. So this is what there is to contain with, that you have to contain with when it comes to what's going to transpire between November and January. All right. We'll take a break, and we'll be right back after this. All right. Hey, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Let me remind people again that we are on Patreon, and you can find us there by going to www.patreon.com/Let's Talk Native. You can sign up a couple of different tier levels to become members of our Patreon group. I also want to remind people that if you are not subscribed to our podcast or to our YouTube channel, you might be missing some content. Not only do we have both my Let's Talk Native and my Let's Talk shows on my podcast, but on my YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV, we have all of the podcast programs, videos of those podcast programs, as well as short form videos. And we plan to do some longer videos as well. So you'll catch even more content if you check out our Let's Talk Native TV channel on YouTube. I also would suggest that people go to our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. And there you can find links to our podcast. You can find links to our videos and photo gallery and some other things there as well. All right, so back to talking about just what the United States deserves in terms of its president. we as Gunjagahaga, as Mohawks, we had a word for the president. It was called Run of the Gaius, and it means town destroyer. And this was the name we originally had for George Washington because of his Sullivan campaigns, which was not just geared towards attacking the Haudenosaunee in our homelands, the Senecas in particular, but to destroying food supplies, destroying our land, trying to make sure that he had inflicted intergenerational trauma against our people, that we would know the level of the terror of our chastisement. That's literally the words that George Washington used. He actually used the words terror and basically used terrorism as a strategy to quell any insurgency from Native peoples back at the origins of the United States. And each president after that, we learned almost through our own pain and suffering that each president had the same design, which was to destroy us. So that's why we look at the president of the United States in a different light than what you do. We've seen how president after president has promoted white supremacy, and we saw it in your greatest heroes, all those faces on the that you carved into the Black Hills at Mount Rushmore, Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt. All of them had made it very clear what their views were on white supremacy as it relates specifically to Native people, and of course, it was also demonstrated through to Black people through slavery and all of that. So, when I hear people say that the United States deserves better than Donald Trump, and I can't help but reiterate over and over again how Trump is a manifestation of your culture, of your history. Look, criminal justice problems aren't new. They have existed, for a very, very long time. It's always been geared towards policing either runaway slaves or protecting, in fact, cops by themselves were, the whole idea of police forces. They were developed for both slave patrols and for defending against lands that were illegally occupied from Native people. So there's always been a racial component to what the purpose of police forces were, and they were geared towards protecting personal property. Well, it was only the wealthy that had personal property that was worth protecting. So it's always been a force that was developed to protect wealth. The wealth of the established wealthy. So that's built into the system, and it's always been that way. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they promoted much of the what exists now as discriminatory or systemic racist police departments. Kamala Harris was top cop in California. She was, a district attorney. She was a state attorney general. Joe Biden was one of the main senators pushing for the crime bill that would end up locking more and more people of color up. And to be clear, you, the voting public, are the ones who buy into this whole idea of law and order candidates. You do that. So when Trump takes the position that he takes, even those of you on the left, you guys bought into the whole justice law and order candidates. You bought into the to the welfare reform, not to make welfare more helpful or that would provide more progressive assistance. No, but to cut it. You bought into all that stuff. You bought into the war on drugs. You bought into the Red Scare. You, the public, did that. Now, look, sure, you were propagandized, but you've been propagandized from the very start with all this stuff. Every war that the United States has been involved in has been it was an attempt to heroize and romanticize war, to romanticize the military. You buy into all that stuff. With the exception of more anti-war demonstrations that took place during the Vietnam War, generation after generation has honor the troops, support the troops, save the troops. Your politics doesn't follow that. I mean, usually after a person's been used up by the U.S. military, they're on their own. Veterans benefits aren't really where they need to be. But you may make noise over that, but that's never the higher priority. There's more of a push to fight over things like abortion or gay rights than to do the right thing on something that has more of a broad-based effect on the public. These are some of the things that you guys have, the voting public, has been a part of. The Patriot Act, and in case you don't recall, the USA Patriot Act is an acronym. It stands for Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism. That's what it isn't about patriotism. It's anything but that. It is about surveillance. And when the Patriot Act first came through, some on the left, were buzzing about it. But you know what? When Barack Obama got elected, so it comes in with George W. Bush. When Obama gets elected, he doesn't do away with the Patriot Act. And all of a sudden, everybody gets silent. And you, the public, bought into that. You allowed that to happen. You allowed this more surveillance on your phone calls, on your cell phones, on what you do on the internet. You allowed all that. You bought into this fear of terrorism, the politics of fear. You've bought into all of it. You buy into all of the propaganda that is dished out to you, without even getting into some of the unanswered questions associated with 9/11. Most of you guys just settled in and bought the story that was sold to you. And you do it time and time again. So to say you don't deserve somebody like Trump, your complicity in all of this stuff, your complicity in every bit of the propagandizing that happens, but both by the right and the left, makes you complicit in the system failing. I'm sorry, take it back. In the system being a failure. It isn't failing. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. So this is what we go through. And again, as a spectator in this thing, and looking at what is really transpiring in what is, by all definitions, an unprecedented time. Look, you've got COVID-19, a global pandemic. You've got corruption that is more visible today than it has been in a very, very long time in the United States. Yeah, there's been political controversies in the past. Look, what you're witnessing now makes Watergate and break-ins by sitting presidents pale by comparison. And what you're going to see after November is going to be something, again, unprecedented. If you think Donald Trump is going to take this thing lying down, and many of you are going to, there are plenty of people on the right who are already arming themselves for what may or may not happen on November 4th. So everybody is actually adding to the level of tension. There's not a whole lot of people trying to smooth this thing over or fix it. And going to the polls on November 3rd isn't going to fix it. It doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't even matter who gets elected. And I'm not saying, categorically that Joe Biden is every bit as evil as Donald Trump. That's not the point. The point is, what is there to be fixed by just changing the name tags? And the show I did just recently, I talked about even trying to plug people of color into these positions. If the system is broken, or again, I guess I keep saying it, if the system is designed a certain way, putting different people in it, putting Barack Obama in the White House didn't change anything dramatically. Putting Kamala Harris in as the VP isn't going to change anything dramatically, even if Joe Biden dies and Harris becomes the president. Nothing is going to change substantially. There have been black U.S. attorneys, U.S. Attorney General Holder. I can't think of I'm drawing a blank on the woman who was the U.S. attorney after him. What's that? Was it Rice? No. Oh yeah, but even Alberto Gonzalez. So look, there have been people of color in these positions. So, but that doesn't change anything. You see mayors of cities that are still having police problems, and they're black. You see chiefs of police who are black, still major problems with all of this stuff. So this is what you have. I mean, this is kind of the situation, as it's designed this way. And it's also designed this way so it doesn't matter. You can put somebody that's a Democrat in these positions. You can put somebody that's a Republican in these positions. It doesn't change. There's still the threat of nuclear war every single day. That still exists. And it doesn't matter who sits, who's the leader of China, who's the leader of Russia, or who's the leader of the United States. Because there are more countries that have nuclear weapons. And who's the one country who tries to be the top cop as it relates to nuclear weapons? The one that dropped the bombs on people. So this is where we get. This is what we get when we see how the system is, and there's very, very little appetite to change it. Like I said, the likelihood of there being any dramatic change to anything, change to the Electoral College, there's some efforts that states are trying to create a commitment that they will always follow the popular vote. That doesn't change the Electoral College dramatically. So this is, again, more of the problem that will continue to plague the United States. And it is a system that is unraveling because it was never designed to be equitable for everybody. And of course, you could argue that nothing can be equitable to everybody. I mean, you could make that argument. I think if there's fairness, if you can take racism, the systemic racism out of the system, yes, it becomes a little bit more equitable. But you also get into this whole notion of not just the white supremacy as it has been known, but now the current euphemism for white supremacy is American exceptionalism. So now you create a whole different level. Even if you could somehow unify Americans or U.S. citizens, which seems unlikely, you still create a sense of superiority over other countries, and that's why and that's why the United States can be as aggressive as it is in all of these other countries. Look, I once saw a billboard in New York City that talked about the millions of people who died because of communism, but nobody's put the billboard up that says how many millions of people died because of American-style democracy. Even the coups that the United States has been involved in against other democracies. Other countries that have really, by definition, better democracies than the United States. Countries that require, runoffs in elections if somebody doesn't get 50% or more of the vote. The United States doesn't have that. The United States has had a couple of presidents who were elected without winning the majority of the votes cast. Bill Clinton became the president because Ross Perot ran and took votes away from George Bush Sr. So these are the flaws in the system that have always been there. And, people will complain. They'll complain, but they don't affect or work for effective changes. These are the kinds of things that we, basically the people have to take control of. Look, my job isn't to fix the United States system, but I will offer an outside critique of it. Your jobs as Americans, those of you who are listening in the cities and those of you who are interested in hearing what I may have to say about the subject, if you are a U.S. citizen, you have more of an obligation than just casting a vote every 2 years or every 4 years. And in fact, regardless of whether it's your candidate that wins, they're still supposed to represent your concerns, even if you voted for the other guy or gal. So what are you going to do about it? I mean, there does need to be people on the street. And when I hear people say, well, it's wrong to go out and protest in the street, well, hell, the same people who bitch like hell about Black Lives Matter protests in the streets of the city, they're just as vocally opposed to somebody taking a knee during the national anthem or standing arm in arm, not even when the anthem is being played. Look, there's not an appetite for peaceful protests over people really taking to the street and perhaps being a little bit more disruptive. There's no appetite to shift it towards more peaceful protesting. The people who are opposed to this are just opposed to anything that changes their comfortable white lives. This is the challenge. And I'll tell you, I heard somebody say, we don't need allies. We need accomplices. So, and by that, what they're really saying is we don't need people to say they support Black Lives Matter. We need people who are prepared to go on the street and be accomplices in making the changes. We don't need people to say, oh, I support the Idle No More movement. We need accomplices. We need people who are willing to go and take a stand. It's not enough to say that you're not a racist. You need to be an anti-racist. It's not enough to say that you recognize Native sovereignty. If your government isn't, then you need to do something about your government. We get into this debate all the time. We are still fighting at the state level and at the federal level, sometimes even at the more local level, every day to assert our distinction as Native peoples. We see Black people fighting every day for their lives. And look, anybody would say, well, there's more crime committed by Black people. Well, why the hell, even if that's true, which I'm not sure that is true, why would that be? I mean, it's not genetically. Nobody is genetically predisposed to commit crimes. But if you've reduced somebody's life to the point where the only way somebody can feed their families is to hustle, and that hustle may cross those lines, then you created the situation. And again, you want to criminalize and weaponize everything. Look, the amount of people who are in prison because of taking drugs, not dealing drugs, but just smoking, being caught with possession of marijuana or whatever else. The amount of people who've done prison time for that is insane. And look, we've seen it demonstrated over and over and over again. Police departments have no problem de-escalating conflicts with white people. They have no problem taking somebody into custody when they're white, even if they committed mass murder. They know how to do it. They just choose not to when it's a person of color. These are choices that are made by police officers. And they're choices that we make as people affected by them by not standing up to them. Everybody says, well, if you just comply with officers, there's nothing in there's no law that says you have to comply with an order that's unjust. Sandra Bland was taken into custody and died in custody because she wouldn't put her cigarette out. There's no law that says a police officer can tell somebody in their car to put their cigarette out and then drag them on the ground and ultimately take them into custody so they can lose their life. I mean, it's insane when you think about what we have tolerated, and we have a way of always justifying it. I mean, I've heard white people even try to, Tamir Rice, yes, I know he was only 12 years old and he was playing with an airsoft gun, but it's an honest mistake that the cops made. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. Shooting a 12-year-old boy with a toy gun that he got for Christmas that's not, there's nothing legitimate about that. It's wrong. And it's a crime. Choking somebody to death, whether it's Eric Garner or whether you're kneeling on the neck, on the neck to the point where you're not only choking them, but you're cutting off the blood supply to the brain. That's not a mistake. You don't choke somebody to death by mistake. You didn't slip with the trigger. You didn't slip with your knee. You kneeled on him for 8 minutes while people were telling you that he was dying. So, look, we all have work to do, but the work isn't to change the name tags. It isn't to change, whose name gets put on the sign. You got to change the system. Thanks for listening. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.